Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Mike Carell are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again here at Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Coach Mike Carell. With me is Dr. Michael J. Murphy, a forensic psychologist. Today, we're talking about shame, unmasking shame, and healing the hidden wound. You know, shame is one of those things that is often misunderstood. It's a force that actually shapes our emotional lives. Today, we're going to dive deep into the anatomy of shame and how it shows up in our bodies, how it shows up in our relationships and our culture. Across four segments in today's show, we're going to unpack the difference between guilt and shame. We're going to explore how unresolved shame manifests somatically, psychologically, socially, and we're going to hear from leading experts. We're going to hear from Dr. Murphy on medicine, sociology, and the trauma healing. There are different results that can come from not dealing with our shame. One of those things being imposter syndrome. That happens to high-performing professionals. That happens to different people in different professions. And we're here to unmask it and see what we can do about it. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about what shame actually is. Dr. Murphy, what is shame?
Shame is such a critical issue in our culture today. I think so many people will understand deeply personally what the feeling of shame is like. And we're going to talk about what that means and how to address that feeling of shame over the course of this presentation. Brené Brown has described shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So many of us as human beings, one of our fundamental needs is to be a part of the human community to which we want to belong. We fundamentally as people have been part of a group for all of the time that humanity has existed, since all of the thousands of years as hunter-gatherers living in small communities and being a part of a group, and therefore to be somehow ostracized from that group or not feel like an appropriate part of that group is something that triggered this deep-seated feeling of shame. So shame actually served a function in some way of keeping the group, lending support to the group becoming more cohesive, which is in the interest of survival. So the group had a higher likelihood of being able to accomplish the goals that they need to accomplish. So shame is not only negative, it can serve a positive function in terms of supporting group cohesion, but also, as Brené Brown pointed out, it is painful, can be painful, and that experience of being flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging, which is a deep sense of isolation and sadness that those of us who have really experienced shame, and almost all of us have at one point or another, we will experience on a number of occasions over the course of our lifetime. And one of the things I wanted to point out at the beginning is that the boomer generation, of which we both, Mike and I, are a part, um, is a huge generation. It's a huge number of people across the planet Earth. Many, 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 many millions and even hundreds of millions of people are at the stage of being what we would call the boomer generation. And we were a huge generation that really um, uh, lots of families had more children than they may have wanted to have. Families in my childhood, it wasn't unusual to have, certainly 3 kids, 5 kids, 8 kids, 10 kids. I knew a family that had 15 kids in one family. And so sometimes those families and the kids, and many of us are products of those families, those huge families of the boomer generation, we really grew up feeling like we were perhaps the unwanted child. And we had a deep-seated sense of lack of value, the fact that we were not a being that there were resources around to be able to care for. And so we really felt a deep-seated kind of biological sense of shame because we kind of were not necessarily wanted as part of the group, which was not uncommon. There was no birth control in those days. So generally speaking, children came and they came in large numbers. And we, in this huge, huge generation of boomers, are here to represent
Right.
the reality of that. So
You
shame,
didn't want to be the runt of the litter, did you? None of us
excuse me?
wanted to be the runt of the litter.
Exactly. And many of us were the runt of the litter, including myself right here. So,
Me too.
so yes. So 2 out of 2 for this one. So yeah, so I think that whole sense is one of the foundations of just being sort of born into a sense of shame and made it just very widespread with our generation.
Yeah. That's such an interesting thing because whether we wanted to or not, shame is the kind of thing that you're either born into or you face it later on. But the thing that's important to realize is that we're in charge. We're in charge of what are we going to do with that shame? Do we have the choice to either accept it and live in it, or we can reject the shame and empower ourselves by a number of different ways. And we're going to talk about those empowering things that we can do to overcome the shame. But I want to make a little distinction. Dr. Murphy, I think you might be able to help with this. What do you think about the difference between guilt and shame? And I know guilt is one of the 5 negative emotions that um, have a positive purpose, but can actually derail us in our life if we don't manage those negative emotions. I know guilt is one of them, but I think somehow guilt ties into shame. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, lots of our audience are aware that I have worked in jails and prisons over many decades of time, maximum security psychiatric hospitals, lots of institutions where people are contained for some kind of legal reason, oftentimes in response to some kind of antisocial behavior on their part, right? So
Yeah.
if they perpetrate an alleged crime or if they're guilty of a crime and you're sentenced to time in prison or you're sentenced to detention in a psychiatric facility for some kind of behavioral reason related to mental illness, then you have um, that process whereby you have to come to grips with the fact that you are thought to have perpetrated some kind of negative or destructive behavior. And as a result of that, um, it actually is a positive thing if you experience some sense of guilt. If you've harmed another human being or harmed your
Right.
community in some way, engaged in behavior that was destructive to others, maybe involved some physical injury to another, and you were convicted of a crime in relation to that behavior, one of the things that we would do in terms of giving people treatment in such institutions is to see if they do have a sense of guilt. And guilt is deeply related to empathy because if you understand that you have done harm to another and you care about that person, then and you have the capacity for empathy, then you care about the harm that you have done. You feel a sense of sadness or loss
Mhm.
because you have harmed a member of the community, your
Right.
community, the human community. So that I think is just really, really an important thing to understand the relationship of guilt and empathy. And one of the things that we would do in terms of treatment is see if the person has a deficit of um, empathy with regard to the effects of their behavior on the people they may have harmed. So I think that's one of the fundamental things about the difference between shame and guilt. Shame has to do with the sense that I may not feel that I have any value to the group. I'm not a valuable human being. Therefore, I feel a lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth. Guilt is something that one hopefully feels, some people feel in response to uh, maladaptive behavior that they may have engaged in that
I see.
involved the harm of another person or your community.
Yeah. That's a good, clear description. Thank you very much. Distinction there. I wanted to talk a little bit about what it feels like to be ashamed. I mean, I know I, for one, and I'm speaking from my own experience, have felt that feeling of helplessness or exposure, and that fear of being disconnected or rejected. Kind of like when a mother bird can detect the weakest of the little birds, she'll throw them out of the nest. And if the bird wants to live, it'll survive. But if it goes along with the flow, it's not going to survive. I think we all have the capacity to want to live, the will to thrive. Um, I, I think that makes a big difference uh, as to whether or not we hang on to shame and use it as part of our life to garner maybe sympathy from others or have people pay attention to us. You know, the idea of a hypochondriac or a chronically ill person wanting people to attend to them could be a manifestation of that helplessness or that desire to be included in some way. What do you think?
Right. So you're talking about the secondary effects of shame, and how, you know, people can feel like they are, as you said earlier, sort of the runt of the litter, the unwanted one. So you go out and you feel like, gee, how can I manage myself? How can I gain a sense of value to the group? And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that can be a motivating factor. I mean, many people have talked about their journey of overcoming shame as they
Mhm.
have discovered some form of behavior that's constructive and healthy and also contributes to the well-being of the group. Whether you're a plumber or a welder or a construction worker or a brain surgeon, I mean, you contribute to your community in those ways. And when you do those things, you sort of redeem yourself from that
Yeah.
sense of loss. So many people have found a way to address the secondary effects of shame by becoming successful in some way and useful in their own right in ways that they believe really contributes to the well-being of the community. Then you feel a sense of self-worth and you start to feel, hey, geez, I am worth something. I am, the group needs me. Other people give you some recognition and accolades. So people who have shame do, as you mentioned, really crave recognition. It's likely that they're going to really want to work hard to see if they can get the accolades that they may have been craving all their lives since they were small children. I'm sure many people in our audience will resonate with that feeling, being a small child where you feel vulnerable and you feel like you're not a person of value, but then you achieve something and then, that feeling can be really a great rush and a great sense of
And
redemption.
it's something that we can leverage into more belonging and actually getting up to a point where we feel like we have something to contribute, something the world needs as opposed to what they want. We're going to talk more about guilt as a precursor. I want to get back to what you were saying earlier about guilt and the purpose that it serves. But we're going to do that when we come back. So don't go away. Thank you for being with us.
Mike Zorich, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 6-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
And welcome back. I'm going to talk a little bit about purposing shame or guilt, purposing not shame, but guilt. Guilt as a precursor, because it can actually do some good and can really trigger us to have a positive effect in our community. Dr. Murphy, you were mentioning something about that. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, working in jails and prisons and courtrooms and testifying in trials, one of the critical issues that people will wonder about is whether a person feels a negative internal sense when they have been found to have engaged in some kind of destructive behavior that harms another person or harms our community.
Like
So,
remorse?
right. So you want to see if they have the manifestation of a process that's called victim empathy. Now, what is victim empathy? I mean, victim empathy is understanding the actual effects of your behavior on the person whom you may have harmed through the aberrant action that you engaged in. Say you assaulted somebody, or you robbed a store, or you cheated on some kind of process that harmed some other system. So are you able to describe, the effect of your behavior on the other person, and to demonstrate that you actually care about the effects of your behavior on uh, the ostensible victim? So that's called victim empathy. Person really needs to care about it. And many of the audience out there, I'm sure, will have had experience with people who don't seem to demonstrate that quality. And that's how we really define someone who could be thought of as having psychopathic traits.
I
People
see.
who can do something wrong and they don't really care about the effect of their behavior on other people. They don't demonstrate what we call remorse. So remorse is a demonstration of what we would call victim empathy, caring
Mm.
about the effects of our actions on others. And it's something that's a part of a relationship in normal relationships. And when we accidentally hurt somebody, oh, sorry, that kind of thing. But are you ready not only to say you're sorry, but to make amends? Recovery
Yeah.
programs are very prominent with regard to that sometimes complex process. That is the process of making amends. Actually
Yeah.
being involved with somebody and saying, not only am I sorry for the harm I have done to you, but what can I do to try to repair or to in some way address the effects of my
Yeah.
behavior upon you. Because the person doesn't really need to forgive you if you haven't demonstrated not only that you did the behavior, but that you care about the effects of your behavior on them.
Yeah.
So that's a complex process, and it's a deep emotional and psychological process.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I went to Catholic school most of my life, and shame was actually a tool in the nuns at the nuns' disposal, and I can remember being a recipient of shame quite a bit. Not only did they verbalize it, they would say, "Shame on you," or "You should be ashamed for what you did," you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
and then publicly humiliate you. Yeah, I remember being whipped in front of the class. Uh, they took my pants down and whipped me in front of the class, and they did that to a whole eighth grade class of boys because they had pea shooters and they used to shoot them into the girls' blouses, and for that they deserved to be publicly humiliated and shamed. Some of us, especially at young ages, don't have the capacity for the kind of empathy that you created. I mean, when we're kids, we're just having fun with each other, and we're actually testing each other's limits. You know, so what is your take on using shame? I know in the juvenile justice system, we used a boot camp, and it had elements of shame in it that we used as, I don't know, maybe a carrot dangling in front of somebody. If you don't want to be ashamed, then you need to rise up. We had an honor code that they would memorize so that they could, develop the capacity to rise to the occasion and do what they needed to do so that they didn't have to be ashamed. So, what are your thoughts on that?
That's such an important observation, I think, the developmental aspects of shame and guilt. I mean, when we're young, one of the things that hopefully occurs as we grow up and we become more familiar with social mores and expectations and the needs of the community is that we learn how to develop an appropriate sense of what we might call shame or remorse
Mhm.
for our conduct. I mean, when we engage in it, that's a core issue that we really need to hopefully see evolve as time goes on. So when we grow up, we really are someone who can be trusted. One of the things that they talked about in those boot camps a lot and still do is the definition of integrity. And
Yes.
what is integrity? So the word integrity is deeply related to shame.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
sort of like if you have integrity, then you are a person who's less likely to engage in behavior that's going to induce or be appropriately targeted with shame.
Mhm.
Because I mean, integrity. The boot camp used to say, and you'll probably recognize this, Mike, uh, that integrity is the maintenance of right conduct in the absence of any external reward, observation, or control. So, in other
Yeah.
words, it's doing the right thing, the correct thing, the thing
Mhm.
that is a benefit to yourself and your community,
Right.
um, even though you're not getting rewarded for it, even though you don't get any prizes, even though nobody is praising you, even though
Yeah.
you may even suffer some kind of negative consequence, you still do the
Mhm.
right.
Yep.
That is the definition of integrity. So that's the manifestation of a healthy sense of an integration of a moral code.
Mhm.
That means that you're less likely to engage in the behavior that's going to induce shame in the future.
Yeah.
So one of the things we want to do as a society is to help all people, children, young adults, people who are older and may have perpetrated some kind of negative behavior, to be able to come to grips with the development of that sense of integrity, the
Yeah.
internalization of integrity inside them. And we're going to
Mhm.
talk about sort of some of the things you can do in order to facilitate that process in the course
Beautiful.
of the discussion. Yes.
One of the things that that sticks out on the honor code, the cadets honor code, one of them was, "I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate anyone who does." So, in other words, we're going to be mindful of uh, people around us and not let them get away with it by tolerating it, But first of all, monitoring ourselves and regulating ourselves so that we do not engage in that kind of stuff. And the other thing is that our word is our bond. And if we don't even keep our word to ourselves, how do we expect to keep our word to others, which is an integral part of integrity itself? I know that over time, if we don't have the structure in our life, we don't have the education or the discipline that points those things out, um, we can either burden others or make people feel less than ourselves by how we conduct ourselves, or we can allow it to pile up within ourselves and feel like we don't deserve the honor that humans deserve. And we're in charge of that. What do you think about the self-regulation and the ability to claim your worthiness, claim your honor uh, by mantras, first of all, and by an attitude of self-efficacy?
Really, that's one of the very important things that you're talking about in terms of the differentiation between guilt and shame.
Mhm.
So, guilt is something that's internal to a person. I may feel guilt inside myself because I've engaged in behavior that I may understand or have discovered or I've even intended is harmful to another person and cause them sadness and loss and some kind of damage. So that's guilt. That's an internal experience on the part of the individual, and it needs to be related to their own internal process. So they're kind of responsible. We are responsible for having an appropriate sense of guilt when we engage in behavior that is harmful to others. Shame, however, it is really a social construct. It's a social event. We feel shame in terms of how we believe we are perceived by others or how others in the group uh, may deal with us or ostracize us in response to behavior that we may have engaged in. So shame is really a social phenomenon. It's an interactive phenomenon. It's not necessarily internal to the individual, although it does have an aspect of internalization as well that we'll
Uh-huh.
talk about later in this conversation. But it really does. Those are two kind of complementary and dichotomous processes that both are very important to the development and life of a healthy person, though they may be uncomfortable in terms of their daily experiences.
Yeah. Would you say that it's up to us to learn how to field uh, the shame as it comes to us externally? I mean, the world is full of criticism, full of judgment, and some of it is not accurate, some of it is not justified. Uh, would you would you say that we're in charge of fielding it and doing something with it when it comes to us, either as a projection of somebody else or another source?
Yeah, such an important point, Mike. When we are subjected to shame that is not appropriate, like just being born, like happened, as we were saying earlier, if you
Right?
happen to be the extra child, if you happen to be the unwanted person, if you happen to have a characteristic. I mean, I was born and I grew up with a speech impediment. So some people may be able to see the effects of that even now, but I stuttered and
Absolutely.
I stammered. And so I was a person who was seen by others as having some kind of flaw. And that resulted in a sense of shame for myself. And so it's something that we can talk about, and we'll be talking about in the next segment, is how some of the things that we can do to sort of assess whether this is a sense of shame that is a result of other external processes over which we had no control and we need to heal, or whether the sense of shame is something that we somehow brought on ourselves. So, yeah, I think that deep sense, the sense that when we have been wounded by shame
Yeah,
and we need to sort of learn how to heal from that is one of the big steps in most people's lives.
that's an excellent topic. When we come back, we're going to talk about what to do when we've been shamed and how to handle it, how to navigate our way through shame that can be constructive or destructive when we come back.
master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
So when we have been shamed, our body remembers it, and it begins to manifest within us in various ways. There is somatic symptomology. There are emotional manifestations of shame. And Dr. Murphy is going to tell us a little bit about how the body remembers and how we come to know through our body how we're experiencing shame. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Murphy?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that shame may be associated with trauma, right? So people who have experienced real negative environments, perhaps it's child abuse, perhaps it's experiences in circumstances of conflict, maybe it's some kind of medical catastrophic process that resulted in harm. People may feel a negative emotional kind of triggering that's directly related to that experience. One of the big things in our generation is the many, many hundreds of thousands of people who participated in the Vietnam War. And they went over there perhaps with a sense of idealism or obligation. And when they got over there, they experienced circumstances that were really deeply harmful to them psychologically and emotionally, as they really experienced horrible sorts of experiences and witnessed things and may even have perpetrated things that were extremely complex and disturbing. So there's a psychiatrist, Dr. Vanderkolk, who worked with those individuals in veterans psychiatric facilities for many, many years. And he found that it was very hard to make progress with them. I mean, that negative sense that they had of shame, resentment, anger, sadness, and fear that was the result of their experience in combat, that they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Those characteristics, he found over many, many years of working with veterans that they seem to have a physiological and even neurological component. So they really are hardwired, if you will. So in the brain and in the gut brain, and it's very important that we talk about the gut brain. You know, one of the things we're learning now is that the brain that we have is not only between our ears, you know, it's also in our belly. And the brain in the belly, the so-called gut brain, has as many neural interconnections and is just as robust and important as the brain we have between our ears. it's really a complex and deeply hardwired system. And when you experience trauma, that is actually hardwired in the gut brain usually, and then reactively in the brain that we have in our skull. So they're interconnected, of course, and the reactive patterns are deeply hardwired. And Dr. Vanderkolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps a Score, a great kind of manual on how to address this complexity, is um, really related to that process. I mean, the fact that it's so hardwired, it's hard to make it go away. Drugs don't seem to fix it. Even talking about it doesn't seem to fix it. I mean, you have to do a whole bunch of things at the same time that we're going to talk about uh, to try to make an effect with that kind of hardwired trauma that is deeply encoded within a human being and may be associated with a deep sense of shame, guilt, sadness, uh, that negative emotional reactive pattern that so many veterans and other trauma victims, law enforcement people, uh, people who have happened to, have a traumatic auto accident or something like that, that resulted in, experiences that it's very hard to forget. One of the things that I can point out as a neuropsychologist as well is that trauma uh, is trauma because it doesn't move to long-term memory, and it gets stuck in what's called, the frontal cortical areas of the brain in so-called working memory. So people who have experienced trauma have said to me over and over again on many occasions, geez, it's like it happened to me 15 minutes ago or 2 days ago. And in fact, it may have happened 20 years ago. It doesn't fade away and get processed into long-term memory like so-called normal memories. I mean, you can remember what you did in high school, or maybe some activities you experienced in playing sports decades ago, and they're stored in memory, and you can retrieve them when you want them. But trauma memory always seems to be in the frontal areas of the brain. It's always present, never really goes away. And so, you got to do a lot of work in order to get those trauma-related memories, which often are associated with shame, as well, to get processed into uh, more long-term memory stored in deeper areas of the brain. So, the way to do that, as we'll talk about, is to do a diversity of things. I mean, many means there's many roads to Rome, if you will. And so if you really want to solve the trauma problem and the shame that goes with it, sometimes you have to intervene with yourself in a whole variety of ways, not just medication, but a lot of other things as well. That's what he was finding, and that's how you really can deal with these deep-seated negative emotional processes.
I have a question. Is it possible to repurpose a memory, especially a traumatic memory? In other words, give it a new meaning so that it can move into your past and not remain there as if it happened yesterday? Is it possible to, you know, change that?
That's a great question, and it really is one of the fundamental things that we do today in therapy. Many people will have heard of what's called narrative therapy. I mean,
Uh-huh.
narrative therapy is when, we help a person to tell the story of their lives and their understanding of their lives. Gee, I came from a family in which I was unwanted. I didn't get the support that I needed. I felt like I was not a valuable person, a really negative and sad narrative, and try to alter that narrative in some way so that the person can reinterpret their
Yeah.
life story in a more positive way. That is narrative therapy. Well, in fact, in spite of the fact that I was unwanted, in spite of the fact that I faced these challenges, in spite of the fact that I had a speech impediment or some other kind of oddity that made me perhaps somewhat ostracized, I persevered. I
Yeah.
was able to compensate and find ways that I really could excel in certain environments. I learned how to read. I learned how to write papers. I learned how to
Hmm.
maybe be a track athlete. I learned, you learn how to do something and you use that opportunity as a means for reinterpretation of your sense of self in a more positive way. And that's the key. I mean, many of the veterans who I've worked with at the time and know personally have done exactly that. I mean, they reinterpreted their experience in the terrible combat of the Vietnam War or other wars, the Gulf Wars, things like that. And they've reinterpreted it in a way that allows them to see um, the nobility even that they demonstrated in those situations, how they persevered, how they learned, the positive things they contributed to their community, their country, through that behavior. So reinterpreting the story of your life in more positive ways is
Yeah.
really the fundamental key that Dr. van der Kolk was discovering in
Mhm.
actually creating change with shame-related behavior.
You know how they say thoughts become feelings, and feelings are uh, what cause our behaviors and our decisions in life. What about if you actually reinterpreted a traumatic memory to where you actually felt good about the new meaning that you've given it? And as a result, you have a good feeling about what you were exposed to or what was done to you in a way that makes you want to use it as a challenge. Like, you know, I remember when I was a kid in high school, I, as a freshman in high school, I weighed 68 pounds and I was like 4 foot
Wow.
7. And so all the athletes were just normal size, but my coach pulled me aside. He goes, "We need to put some meat on those bones."
Mhm.
And he took me into the weight room just by ourselves, and he just gave me a bar with nothing on it. And he goes, "I want you to push bench press that bar until your body feels good about doing it and your form is good. Once you have a perfect form, we're going to add weights." As soon as I got the form, he packed on these weights, like, and it was a big challenge, you know. But I felt good about that challenge because, in other words, he had faith in me. He believed that I could now have weights on my bar. You know, if we looked at life's challenges in the same way, we would probably be more welcoming about them. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, you had an experience in which you were able to demonstrate an experience that someone else saw you in a positive way. Okay,
Yeah,
he saw you, oh, I think you can do this. I believe that you have the potential to be successful in this. Then you were successful with the bar, then you put more weights on it, and okay, you're successful with that. And you saw that you were capable of developing more strength over time, and that therefore you could accomplish something hard. And that's the only thing that improves self-esteem is when we accomplish something that we believe is difficult. I mean, veterans are such wonderful people because in the course of recovering from the trauma of combat, they do something that's really hard. And then thereafter, they're really powerful individuals who have a lot to offer their community and their fellow soldiers and many other people because they've accomplished something that is really difficult, and they know, therefore, that they they are strong, as we say. They are psychologically and emotionally strong, so they can translate that trauma from a sense of loss and shame and deficit to something that actually is something that helps them to understand that surviving in complex and challenging circumstances, as you did, and finding a way to succeed is really a wonderful asset and really worthy of a whole lot of respect and admiration, even. And everyone who knows that person then recognizes that, and you become someone who's really of value in the community, and then shame tends to dissipate over
yeah. You
time.
become a symbol.
Disappear. Yeah.
That's awesome. You know, it's kind of like uh, an alchemy, a form of alchemy, you know,
Right.
for humanity. I want to talk more about some of those things and other ones that can help turn shame around when we come back. So don't go away.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
And welcome back. You know, in the beginning, we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome and what it does to professionals and high-performing individuals in our community. And Dr. Murray, talk a little bit about how that comes into play and what we can do about that, because I know that there are multiple ways of getting past. I've had to deal with it with some of my clients, you know, and these are people you would never expect to be dealing with shame because their statistics and their reputation precedes them, and you would never know that they are actually shame victims. So talk a little bit about imposter syndrome, how it works, and what it's all about, so we can get into how to overcome it.
Yeah, something about the imposter syndrome, once again, has that negative and positive aspect. I mean, part of really the definition of imposter syndrome, I think, is the feeling that we don't really belong where we are. You know, if you're a soldier, if you're an executive, if you're an athlete, you figure, hey, I don't really belong in this group. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm really going to be found out. I mean, someone's going to discover, in fact, that I'm really don't belong here, and I'm going to be then expelled from the group in shame. And so then the shame comes
Start
in
all over.
because the person is playing over in their head again and again and again. I'm going to be discovered for the fake that I am. So of course that's a natural feeling that many of us have. I remember as a, testifying for a long time as a, uh, an expert witness, which I have done on many, many, many hundreds of occasions. And in the beginning, trying to learn how to function really well as an expert witness is not easy
Yeah.
because a courtroom is essentially an adversarial situation. It's a situation in which two sides uh, face each other, and they, to the best of their ability, each side tries to win. Then the jury decides who won, or the judge decides who won, in fact. And it's really a situation of conflict with which many of us are not terribly comfortable. But we have to get through that and support ourselves through this really highly conflicted and highly charged and potentially shame-inducing
Yeah.
situation. You really blow your
Discrediting.
yeah. So a lot of it is learning how to be confident, but not overconfident, how to be competent, and just be able to reflect that and let yourself be perceived as a human being, as sincere, and yet able to really comport yourself in a way that others will find credible. But that takes a lot of practice. So you have to go through the hard time. So
Yeah.
supporting oneself through the early phases of the learning curve is really important in dealing with shame and dealing with the sense of anxiety that goes along with stuff like imposter syndrome, when you think you really don't belong in this group or you're not going to be successful. But over routines, I mean, if you're learning to play the piano, in the beginning it doesn't sound so great. But after, months or years, maybe even decades of practice,
Mhm.
people are going to go, wow, you're amazing. You're incredibly skilled. And you'll have gone from that situation in which, hey, I don't really belong here, to one in which you are, in fact, a star in terms of that process. So the key is to learn how to support oneself through the early period of insecurity and anxiety, to prepare oneself as well as one can, but then also to accept, that natural sense of um, lack of high level of skill that you have to get through
Yeah.
during the early phases of any skill, learning any skill. You want to learn how to play basketball. I mean, you're not going to be the best right away.
Right.
It's only after months and years of practice that you're going to get to the point where you really can be an expert. So I think, you know, learning how to engage in what's called positive self-talk. I mean, to sit down in a chair, one of the great tricks is, and I think lots of the very best athletes and performers of all kind use this trick. That is to sit down, close your eyes, visualize yourself in the situation that you will find yourself in, whatever it is, whether it's doing a presentation in a classroom, or whether it's performing in an athletic event, or whether it's learning how to talk, do a presentation in front of a large group.
Yeah.
So the important thing is to sit down, relax, breathe into your abdomen, just spend a minute or two just helping yourself to calm down, slow your heart rate, maybe imagine yourself s- sitting on a beach in a comfortable chair, just watching the waves come in one at a time till you become very calm, and then start to visualize yourself performing the function that you want to perform in a very successful way, remaining calm, um, watching yourself go through it very slowly, watching yourself do it very successfully, visualize yourself feeling calm and confident in the situation. And perhaps most importantly, visualize yourself feeling good about your performance after you get done. So
Yeah.
imagine yourself having completed the task, whatever it is, and imagine yourself feeling satisfied and calm, um, and really pleased with how you performed in the situation, uh, whatever the challenge was. So I think that's the key, is to sort of train your brain to associate the problematic situation or the challenging situation with a
Yeah.
sense of calmness, and then also train your brain to understand that after you get this done, you are going to really feel great about how you did.
I know there are a number of different ways of what they call creative transmutation, doing creative things. And we don't have enough time to talk a lot about them. But I wanted to at least mention a few of the different things that people are doing, along with what you're suggesting now, which is probably the most prevalent of ways of doing it. But artistic pursuits is one of them, doing something artistic or creative or Zen-like, if you will. And then there's advocacy and evidence gathering. In other words, using things that will provide evidence to people to believe in themselves, who they are, who you are. Um, and then the cognitive reframing, which aligns with what you were just describing, telling yourself about that. And then mentorship and peer support, giving back to the community. I remember hearing somebody say that you're not truly successful until you feel the need to give back.
Hmm.
And it's an empowering thought, empowering feeling. What are your thoughts on some of those things?
Well, one of the things is that, the giving back is what is really rewarding when we realize that we serve a function in our group, we serve a function in our community, and that our community is grateful for our presence. I mean, that's the biggest thing. So I wanted to urge people to like and subscribe to this video so others can enjoy it too and get the benefit from it. And we're so happy that you joined us today and look forward to meeting with you again.
Thank you.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with host Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.